Welcome, everyone. My name is Greg Lindhorst. I'm a program manager on the Power Platform, working on Power Fx.
And my name is Mike Stahl. I'm an architect on Power Platform, working on Power Fx.
Today, we're going to be talking to you about Power Fx, the low-code programming language for everyone. Back in March for Ignite, we introduced Power Fx as an extraction and an expansion of the formula language we already have in Power Apps Canvas today. It's very much an Excel-like language. We're trying to leverage as much as possible of that language, of the knowledge that people already have from Excel, for them to express logic and express code and to build applications. But it doesn't stop with applications. It's going to be for automations and for other places in which logic can be used. We announced that it's going to be an open source offering. We don't quite have the open source code available quite yet. We do have a repo up on GitHub, and various people have gone and played with that and seen what's there. It's just documentation today, and we are working hard to get the code there, and we'll be bringing that to you as soon as we can. But we are going to open source a language for everybody to use and to integrate in their own products. And we'll show you an example of a third-party company that's doing that later in this talk. It's expressed as text, is like a programming language. It's meant to be used with VS Code and GitHub, as well as being used in embedded situations like Power Apps Studio. And to that point, it's not just about low code and somebody who doesn't know how to program. It also can accelerate a professional developer to be able to express themselves and be more productive in building applications and other pieces of logic. To that last point, it is a language for everyone. It's very important to us that we span, without any cliffs, the spectrum from no code, where you're not writing code, where you're expressing natural language and you're using UI builders to describe what you want, through to low code, where you can see a very concise and simple representation for the logic, which is very Excel-like, all the way up to professional code. Microsoft has had various products over the years that did parts of this spectrum, but we're the first that's going to try to span the whole thing, so that something that a system developer built with a no-code tool can be used all the way up with somebody with VS Code who's been programming for 20 years. They will be able to modify and understand and maintain that code after it's been produced. To the point about no code, we are announcing at Build during this conference that we are integrating GPT-3 and PROSE into Power Apps. What does that mean? GPT-3 is a well-known natural language processor that can take English statements and compile them into various other languages, and we're going to target that at Power Fx. And PROSE is a technology that we've had in Excel for quite some time, where you can express what you want by example. You can take a column and write out what its transformation should look like, and it will write the formula automatically for you. So there's an example of that happening. I'm creating a new list here in a gallery in a Canvas application. And I'm going to go and I'm just going to type in the natural language that I want for that. And it's going to zoom in here to show you what the GPT-3 engine has come up with as a set of formulas that map to what that natural language would give you. So similar to that, in PROSE, we'll have an example here where the right-hand panel, I can give it examples of the kind of transformation I want from that data. And then it will write the formula that makes that transformation for you. So Power Fx, we're talking about Power Fx, but at the no-code end of that spectrum, it's important that we provide tools that allow a no-code person who doesn't know how to write code, doesn't know syntax, doesn't know when to match parentheses, that they can express themselves, and we can catch on to what they want and make good for them. We're going to be expanding Power Fx not just for Power Apps, but we're going to be using it across the spectrum. We're going to be using it for Power Automate in the years to come, Power Virtual Agents relatively soon. Dataverse, we're actually going to show an example of that today. And then eventually, I think it will be used in Power BI as well for orchestration. Power BI already has a couple of languages, and DAX and M for doing data analysis that are read-only. And we're not replacing those in any way with Power Fx, but they don't write back data. And when they do, when they get into that space, we think Power Fx will be the language they will be using. So as I've said, Power Fx is that language that you see in the formula bar for a Canvas app today, you know and love from that place. It's all about Excel. I can't literally say Excel enough in this presentation, because that is the heart of what we're trying to accomplish, is that leverage. And this FX, just the fact that it's an FX formula bar and it has the same style as Excel, is not accidental. We're trying to leverage that same pattern for people that are very accustomed to it in Excel. Now, we're taking it further than Excel might, in that we have GitHub integration, for example. We have a source code representation for the formulas that make up an application. And in this example, I'm actually using GitHub to modify a formula in an app without using the tool itself. I'm doing it in GitHub. Now I can do a pull request and do a commenting and get it reviewed and do all the professional things that people do with source code control systems. I can do that with this application and then load it back into our studio and see that modification. That format is a simple YAML format. We instead of inventing something new, we adopted the YAML standard that's in the industry today to make it easy for people to parse and work with these files. And that's available today as a tool that people can use to extract and interact with these formulas directly. And finally, I've kind of skirted around, but what is PowerFX? Well, at its heart is a general purpose language. It is like JavaScript or C# or these other general purpose languages that are meant for expressing logic. It's special in a couple different ways. It is statically typed. Unlike JavaScript, everything needs to be typed ahead of time. It's a functional language. It's declarative. Like Excel, it's all about describing the formula, the dependencies between different objects and having us recalculate automatically. And it is a textual computer language. It is something you can see, you can GitHub, you can VS Code, you can use other tools to interact with. We follow Excel's formula language very closely as possible. We're trying to get to a place where the same functions, and even the same function you might write in Excel with a lambda or in our language, they should be able to transform between the two seamlessly. The consistency should be really strong. Same data structures, the same data types, etc. It is a data flow engine, so it allows for modifications in one place to trigger changes elsewhere, and for that to recalc the app or the automation very much like it does in a spreadsheet. We did add imperative logic where Excel doesn't have any because we had to. An app has buttons, you press them, they do things. We had to have a way to express that, and so we did add that to the language. And we're very conscious, finally, about being real time. When you're writing this language, it's super important that you get real-time feedback. And Excel provides that really well. Not only can it validate that the formula is correct, but the data that the formula produces, that also will be immediately available to you. So you can see that you did the right formula. You got the result that you expected. Now to this point, here's an example from Stack Overflow where I've got a formula from Excel that somebody posted on how to do a reverse string search. And I've taken that exact same formula and I've applied it in PowerFX inside of Power Apps today. And as I type in that text box at the top, it's doing this calculation automatically. It's recalcing as new characters are added to that text box and then showing me the result, exactly the way Excel would for that same formula. This level of consistency is what we're after. You know, A1 has been replaced with text input 1.text because we have controls and properties as opposed to cells, but otherwise the functions and how they work, those are identical between the two. So we're, again, all about Excel consistency. So with that, I'm going to jump into 3 demos that show, I've shown it already in Canvas apps. I'm going to be showing you another couple places in which we are using PowerFX and places where potentially you might want to use it in your own applications. The first place I'm going to use it is for model-driven commanding. In model-driven apps, commanding today is done through scripts, through JavaScript. It's tedious. It's really meant for professional developers. We're replacing that with a new designer and that same formula bar that you see here at the top that allows for people to write formulas instead. It's more concise, it's easier, it's less error prone. There's lots of advantages. And so let's take a look.
Thanks, Greg. Hey folks, Casey Burke here from the Power Apps team. Today we're super excited to announce the next generation of commanding and how we're incorporating PowerFX. For the first time ever, we now have low-code designer. It's going to make it super easy to start configuring and working with the model-driven command bar and our converged app story. What makes this really simple is we've now incorporated PowerFX, and you can use that both for actions, what the button does, as well as controlling the visibility of the button. But we still have JavaScript support. We don't want to have any cliffs, and so for your more advanced scenarios, you can still use that, and it's easier to do so now. You can also set the commands to a scope of an app. In the past, if you had 2 apps deployed in the same environment, those would have to share the same command bar. Not anymore. We're very excited to have a preview coming out soon, and the goal is to hit GA by later this year. So now let's dive in and take a look at what we've been working on. In the new app designer now, I can go ahead and select an entity, say edit the command bar. That's going to prompt me for the location of the command bar that I want to edit. So let's do the main form for the account table. See here, loads this brand new command designer. We have WYSIWYG drag and drop support. Go ahead and enter a label for the command. And then go ahead and set an icon. And for the icons, you can choose from any of the built-in out-of-the-box font icons that we have, as well as any of the web resources. But you can also upload your own SVGs. And you can see here that you can run an expression, but you can also switch to JavaScript if you need to. So let's use a function here. We're going to go ahead and patch tasks, which is a related table. And we're going to add a task and associate it with the account table. So right now we're going to set the regarding field on the task to the accounts. We're going to pass the context from this account that you're on because we're on the account form. We're going to do self.selected item, and we'll pass the account name. Then we'll go ahead and give it a subject. For this one, it's going to create a task that goes to the nurture team to help with opportunities that are in trouble. So let's go ahead and save and publish that and go take a look. So now as a salesperson, I can come in and visualize the deals that I'm working on. And if one of them is in trouble, like this one here, that has a low probability of closing, we can go ahead and look at the account details and then go ahead and click the button. It's that simple. Goes ahead and creates the task, assigns it to the nurture team. They're going to go ahead and take it from here. Thank you all very much for listening in, and back to you, Greg.
Okay, another place we're going to be applying Power Fx is for calculated columns in Dataverse. Dataverse already has calculated columns, but they're fairly limited, and they're not expressed in a convenient textual format. They have their own special designer, and they're somewhat underpowered. They only have a small set of functions that you can interact with. We're going to replace that with the full Power Fx experience, where you can write a full-on Excel-like expression, taking advantage of much more powerful and more varied set of functions, and doing it by just writing that line of code, doing a sum, doing an addition of two different columns. We're going to be doing it in the screenshot you see here. We'll be showing it in Teams. We'll be shipping it in Teams. The demo will be in the Maker portal and in Dynamics UI. So that will be expressed on all the endpoints that Dataverse can display.
In this demo, we will take a look at how Power Fx is used in Dataverse to enable formula columns functionality. The scenario we have is that a sales rep wants to create a sales quotation app to capture sales quotations. What we have here is a sales quotation table with 8 columns, and columns like product ID, product name, quantity, unit price, and discount are regular columns, whereas columns like gross amount, discount amount, and net amount are formula columns. The gross amount column, for example, needs to have a formula behind the scene to be able to compute the gross amount, which is going to be quantity times unit price. Similarly, the discount amount and net amount will have the corresponding formulas. Let's add a new sales quotation line. Product ID 3000. Let's say we want to sell some pens and quantity is 1000, unit price is $2 per pen, and we want to give a discount of 10%. We will save and close, and we will refresh the data. So the new quotation line got added for selling 1000 pens. And if we see the gross amount of 2000 got computed automatically because there was a formula, which was quantity times unit price. We also want to enable this sales quotation app to also allow us to capture sales tax and compute the sales tax. So in order for us to do that, let's quickly go and add the appropriate columns to add the sales tax functionality. Let's add a new column called sales tax. And I want to specify a formula for computing the sales tax, which will be unit price times, let's say 10%. So we can go and say done. And we also want to add one more column to compute the net line amount, because we want the sales tax to be included in the computation of the net line amount. So we will call this as the line amount. And in the description field, we will specify the formula, which is net amount, which we added, plus sales tax. So once the table is saved, if we look at the sales tax and the line amount columns that we just added, the data type got automatically set to what the Power Fx compiler returns to Dataverse. So this goes to show that the formula is actively understood by the Power Fx compiler, and based on what data type it deduces from the formula, it returns that to Dataverse, and that is used to set the data type on the column automatically. So the users creating the table and adding formula fields does not have to remember the data type. The system is going to compute that automatically. So now that we have added the additional columns for computing sales tax, let's go back to the data and let's refresh the data. Well, we don't have the sales tax columns, obviously, because we have to go and now update the views so that we can bring those columns into these views. So let's quickly go and add the columns that we just added, which will be the sales tax and also the line amount. And we can publish this view. So once it is published, we can go back and we see the new fields that we added, which is sales tax and line amount.
And finally, we're going to show you a demo of Acumatica. This is a company that's outside of Microsoft that we partner with, and they're going to be showing you additional Power Fx for doing calculations both of single fields and for roll-ups in their product. And again, they're all about leveraging that low-code, well-known Excel-like language that is Power Fx. And they're taking advantage of the fact that we are going to be open source for all to integrate. So Acumatica, other companies will be using Power Fx to extend their solutions, their products, to add the low-code ability.
It's great to be talking to you all. My name is Ajoy Krishnamurthy. I'm with Acumatica. We offer cloud ERP with modules like financials, inventory management, CRM, payroll, and many more. We offer no-code, low-code capability to our customers, an important area for us, and we continue to invest in. With the recent announcement from Microsoft about Power Fx, we are now partnering with Microsoft to explore how we can leverage Power Fx within Acumatica. Rather than talking about it, let me actually show you an example of what we are doing there. Let me do that by bringing up an invoice in the system. So here's an invoice record. And within this record, one of the capabilities we offer within Acumatica is the ability to add custom fields. We call them user-defined fields. And in this example, we've added things like days until due date and total discount amount and so on. And that's where Power Fx comes in. So if I go and look at this user-defined fields, and if you look at the value column, we are using Power Fx formulas to add values to these user-defined fields. And one thing you would notice is that these formulas look a lot like Excel formulas, something that our users are very familiar with. For example, average discount percent. You can do the average function with the current document details, the list you saw in that invoice, along with the discount percent. I see the total discount amount is empty, so I'm going to go ahead and add the sum function here, calculation. And once I do that, I can now go back to the invoice. And if I bring up the user-defined field, what you'll see is now I've got the total discount amount and the discount items and so on. So for example, I can make a change to this particular item. Let's say I want to issue a 5% discount to this item. If I go ahead and save it, you'll see that numbers automatically change. So it's dynamic and real time. So as you can see now, the discounted items are 4 and the discounted amount also changed. So quick tour of what's possible with Power Fx from within Acumatica. We're continuing to work with Microsoft and exploring this further. Wanted to share this update with you all.
All right, now let's take a look at the architecture that's going to make this possible. Mike take it away.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. So how does this all work? So first, a host is going to consume PowerFX to offer a way for makers to go customize their application. And we've seen a few examples of that so far. The host will manage the variables in the state and the extensibility points. And then there's a few things that we're providing to enable the host. First, we're providing a reusable formula bar, very similar to the one that you'd see in Canvas and in these other examples that Greg showed, as a React control for hosts and makers to be able to go and edit the formulas with errors and IntelliSense and suggestions and drop downs and potentially even integration with GDPR3 and these other more advanced language features. We're also providing an analysis engine as a NuGet package, easily consumable in C#, and this is where the host can pass the expressions and some context in, have it analyzed, type checked, and then ultimately compiled to some sort of code gen or interpreted even on the fly, depending on what's the most appropriate target for the host. So for example, if your host is running this in a website, we can compile it to JavaScript and run it on the client. If you're running it on the back end of a multi-tenant server, we could go and interpret it. And if you're running it in a database, like we saw with Dataverse, we can actually compile some of these expressions straight into SQL and then run them in the database context. And then as these expressions run, they may be talking back to the host to access extensibility points, variables, state, etc. So let's look at what a formula actually compiles to. So here we've got a little example where hello concatenated with the results of a lookup and the handwritten JavaScript equivalent. And you could write the JavaScript for this, but PowerFX is making it so much easier. And for example, being asynchronous. With JavaScript, you have to deal with the asyncs, the thens, promises, etc., resolved, rejections. With PowerFX, we're async automatically. For delegation, in JavaScript, you would have to explicitly write out the OData query, whereas with PowerFX, we can analyze the expression right there and realize that part of it, in this case, this predicate, score is greater than min score, could actually be run on the server. And we can hoist that expression and produce the OData query for you. A third thing is projection. What are you actually using from the expression? Again, for JavaScript, you would have to explicitly write the select clause and call out the fields that you need, and you may have to analyze where in your overall program you're using them and figure out what to put in that select clause. Whereas with PowerFX, we'll go analyze the usage for you and infer which fields are needed and build up the selection query for you. A fourth thing is the record scope, that for PowerFX, we can see that predicate, score is greater than min score, is referring to an entity, in this case test alphas, and we can go and scope it specifically there, provide IntelliSense, provide type checking for it. Whereas when you have to write out the OData query yourself, it's a string and you don't get that sort of type checking and scoping. Another thing is just a similarity with Excel, as Greg's been mentioning and showing in these examples. So that familiarity, 200 million people, makers using Excel formulas that will be very natural and feel comfortable with PowerFX. Another thing is just the type checking, to be able to go ensure that the strings and the numbers and currencies and different types are compatible and coerce as necessarily. And another part of this is just even the calculation about when to run. So when you write it explicitly in JavaScript or C# or another imperative language, you may have to see that, okay, well, this depends on min score is changed, subscribe to notification events, and do that triggering and tracking yourself. Whereas with PowerFX, because the formulas are easy and analyzable, our runtime can go see the dependencies and can go automatically do updates and reevaluate the formulas when the dependencies change. And then, again, we can have the same syntax, whether it's local, running in a client, or whether it's running in the server. So the user doesn't really have to worry about where it's going to run. They can just focus on the logic that they want to, the one-liner to do their customization. And another thing that we take care of is error handling. So if you write all the code by yourself, often you have to add the tries, catches, error checks at every spot. With PowerFX, at every spot, we can do the error handling for you, the detection, the telemetry, and the propagation to do it in a safe way. So there's a lot of different things. You could do that yourself if you wrote it in JavaScript or you wrote it in C#, but with Power Fx, it's just so easy, and we can take care of it in a consistent way, an easy way, so that your makers and your customizers don't need to have a pro dev background to go write simple things like that. So when we talk about expressions going everywhere, we mentioned earlier that we might compile to multiple backends. Here's a specific example. On the previous slide, we looked at what it would look like compiling it to JavaScript and running it in the web. That same expression, Power Fx could go to a SQL backend and compile the expression to SQL and go produce some SQL statements that would run directly in the database. And similarly, we could take that same expression and we could run it through an interpreter where we don't compile it to anything and just interpret it on the fly and run it through and evaluate it that way. So different backends lets your maker write the expression once and then run it in a variety of contexts. And now I'm going to hand it back to Greg.
Thanks, Mike, and thanks everybody for watching our video. On the bottom of the slide here, we have the timeline of what this stuff is going to be introduced. Model-driven commanding and Dataverse calculated columns we're hoping to get out in public preview by the end of June. Then we'll be working hard to finish up that open source offering and getting those components that Mike described out to you in our GitHub repo for people to play with. And then a little further out, we'll be looking at Power Automate, Power Virtual Agents, and some other properties within the Power Platform in which we'll be applying this technology. If you have any questions, there's documentation up on our site, and there is the Power Fx GitHub repo. It's easy to find on GitHub. If you have any comments, questions, issues, feel free to fill them out in the GitHub repo, and we'll get to them. Thank you very much.